Please don't leave me in the dark. I'm not here just to fix a lamp." She was trembling in the dark, curled up in her mansion, haunted by a past no one knew. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside her. Memories she'd buried for years were rising fast. Then he came, a tired mechanic soaked in rain, called at 2 a.m. for a broken light. But what he touched was her soul. With no judgment, no questions, just quiet presence, he brought more than light into that room. He brought peace, warmth, and something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. This isn't just about electricity. It's about the night that changed two lives forever. A woman with power and a past she can't escape. Vanessa Kingsley wasn't just rich. She was revered, envied, and misunderstood in equal measure. At 41, she ran one of the most influential private equity firms on the West Coast. Her name commanded boardrooms. Her photo graced business magazines. Her charitable foundation rebuilt hospitals and funded women's shelters across 3 continents. And yet, she lived alone in a mansion carved into the Beverly Hills hillside, surrounded by glass, silence, and shadows. To the world, she was untouchable, unshakable, unbreakable. But no one knew what happened when the lights went out, because Vanessa Kingsley hadn't slept in the dark since she was 14 years old. That age wasn't just a number for her, it was a trap door, one she could fall through at any moment if the room went too quiet, too dim, too much like that basement. That year, she had been a bright-eyed scholarship student with dreams of becoming a writer. One evening, while walking home from school, she was grabbed off the street. No one ever found the man. She never saw his face. But she remembered everything else. The rope burn on her wrists, the freezing floor beneath her skin, the smell of mold, and worst of all, the darkness. Pitch black. 3 days. No food. No light. No sound except for a leaking pipe and the scraping of rats nearby. When she was rescued, Vanessa didn't speak for nearly 2 weeks. Her parents thought she had gone mute, but really she had just disappeared into herself. The light switch in her soul had been flipped off. And even though the world outside moved on, the girl inside her never left that basement. Years passed. Therapy helped. Time dulled the edges. Success gave her armor. But the fear remained. That silent terror. That deep, instinctive panic that bloomed in her chest every time she stood alone in the dark. So she made a rule. A small one. Always leave a light on. Night lights, bathroom lamps, even a flickering candle in hotel rooms. She could function. She could lead a team of analysts, negotiate billion-dollar mergers, smile on red carpets, as long as there was light. But when the storm hit that night, it wasn't the thunder that shook her. It was the silence that followed. Because when the power cut out, the walls of her elegant home melted away. Marble became mildew, silk sheets became damp concrete. The past came rushing back like a wave, and she was no longer Vanessa Kingsley, powerful CEO. She was just a girl again, a girl crawling across a darkened floor, reaching for a flashlight that flickered once and died. In the chaos of that stormy night, her voice broke as she called for help, not as a businesswoman, but as a human being unraveling in her own home. She whispered to the dispatcher, "Please, just send someone. I'll pay anything. Just don't leave me in the dark." And somewhere across the city, someone heard her. Someone who had no idea how much more he'd be asked to fix than just a broken lamp. Eli Monroe, father, mechanic, survivor. Eli Monroe had long stopped believing in miracles. At 37, he was no stranger to exhaustion. His hands were calloused from 2 decades of manual labor, his shoulders heavy from the weight of bills, deadlines, and hospital visits. Life had never handed Eli much. Not when he was a kid bouncing through foster homes, not when he dropped out of trade school to take care of his pregnant girlfriend, and certainly not when she left him 3 years later, leaving him with nothing but a toddler and a note that read, "I'm not strong enough to do this." But Eli stayed, always, for his daughter, Emily. Emily Monroe, age 6, had the gentlest eyes and the most fragile heart, literally. A congenital heart defect meant sleepless nights, frequent doctor visits, and a terrifying surgical deadline looming just 3 months away. The surgery could save her life, but the cost, astronomical. Eli had maxed out every credit card, sold his tools twice, and was still drowning in debt. By day, he worked for a small electrical repair company. By night, he picked up every side gig he could, restaurants, emergency calls, even hotel maintenance when he could find it. But no matter how many hours he worked, the math never worked in his favor. That night, when the storm rolled in and the rain came down like punishment, Eli had just finished unclogging a drain in a diner kitchen. He was heading home, soaked and shivering, when his phone buzzed with a private dispatch alert. Emergency repair, lighting system failure, high payout, Beverly Hills zip code, immediate response requested. He stared at the screen. The payout was more than he made in a week. He glanced back toward the cracked rear window of his truck, where Emily slept curled under a blanket in the back seat, her tiny frame rising and falling in uneven rhythm. She needed that surgery. He couldn't say no. So he drove through the storm, gripping the wheel like it owed him something, the GPS blinking toward a mansion hidden behind hedges and steel gates. The house loomed in the darkness like something out of a dream or a nightmare. When he stepped out, the rain punched him in the chest like fists. He grabbed his old tool bag, covered his head with his jacket, and jogged up the steps. Before he could knock, the heavy door creaked open, and there she was. The woman standing behind it wasn't what he expected. Not the polished socialite, not the snobby billionaire stereotype he'd encountered a dozen times before. She was barefoot, hair damp, wrapped in a silk robe clinging to her frame, like it too was trying to hold her together. Her eyes, God, her eyes, looked like they had seen a war no one else had witnessed. She stared at him like he was a ghost, or maybe a rescue boat she wasn't sure was real. He was about to introduce himself, but she couldn't seem to form words. Her hands shook on the doorknob. So Eli did the only thing that felt right. He reached forward, slowly, and helped her open the door. She didn't flinch, but she didn't speak either. Their eyes met. In that instant, Eli saw something he recognized far too well. A person trying not to fall apart. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer small talk. He simply stepped inside, shoes off out of respect, tool bag in hand. She turned and led him silently through the dark halls of the mansion, where every shadow felt like it held a memory. No lights, no warmth. Just soft footsteps and something unspoken crackling between them. He had come to fix a broken lamp, but instinct told him this job was going to be about much more than wires and voltage. I just can't be alone in the dark? Vanessa didn't know how to speak the words. Not at first. She had led him up the grand staircase like a ghost guiding a stranger through a haunted house. Her bare feet made soft taps on the marble. Her robe whispered against her legs. The mansion was still dark, silent, except for the storm grumbling beyond the glass. When they reached her bedroom, she stood at the doorway like she wasn't sure she wanted to go in. Eli gently stepped past her, setting down his worn tool bag near the nightstand. The lamp beside the bed sat askew, its wire limp like a snapped nerve. She hovered a few feet away, arms wrapped tightly around herself. I just can't be alone in the dark, she said finally, voice barely louder than the rain. Eli looked at her, not with confusion or pity, but with a calm, steady gaze. Then he nodded once. That was all she needed. He knelt beside the lamp and began working in silence. Vanessa sat on the bed's edge, gripping the small LED flashlight he had handed her earlier. She clutched it like a lifeline, her fingers white around it. The soft amber glow barely lit her face, but Eli could still see how drawn it was. Exhaustion, fear, something deeper than either. He didn't ask her what happened. He didn't ask why a woman who had everything look like she was breaking apart from within. He just unscrewed the lamp's cover, tested the bulb, rewired the connection, and made sure the voltage was safe. He worked with practiced movements, steady, quiet, present. Vanessa watched him, not just because she was afraid of the dark, but because there was something grounding about him. The way he didn't fill the space with meaningless words, the way he made himself small in her room without making her feel smaller, and maybe, just maybe, the way he didn't look at her like she was fragile. When the bulb finally flickered back to life, it cast a soft halo across the room. Vanessa let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The light didn't just fill the space. It chased away something she thought she couldn't escape. But Eli didn't move to leave. He didn't pack up right away. He simply sat in the nearby armchair, hands resting loosely on his knees, gaze turned not to the lamp, but to her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said gently after a long pause. She didn't reply, but her shoulders dropped just slightly. "I've fixed 1,000 lights," he continued, his voice low. "But this, I don't know. This felt different." Vanessa blinked. Then, for reasons she didn't understand, she began to speak. "I was 14, she said slowly, "when it happened." Eli didn't react, not with wide eyes or gasps, just quiet attention. "They locked me in a basement. No lights, no sound, just dripping water and darkness. For 3 days." Her breath caught. "When they found me, I couldn't talk. I didn't talk again for almost 2 weeks." She stared at the floor, ashamed of something she had long buried beneath boardroom armor and philanthropic smiles. "I never told anyone that," she whispered. "Not even my therapist. Not like that." Eli stood, walked to the kitchenette in the corner, returned a minute later with a fresh cup of hot chamomile tea. He didn't say anything, just placed it gently beside her. "This one's hot," he said and sat back down. That moment, the silence, the warmth, the absence of judgment, did more for Vanessa than 1,000 therapy sessions ever had. He hadn't tried to fix her. He'd simply stayed, and that made all the difference. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone in the dark, not because the light was back on, but because someone chose to stay in the shadows with her until she could see again. "This one's hot." The rain had dulled to a gentle rhythm outside, but the stillness inside the room was profound, fragile, like the moment might shatter if either of them moved too quickly. Vanessa sat curled on the edge of her bed, her knees drawn up under the blanket, her hands cradling the steaming cup Eli had placed beside her. She hadn't taken a sip yet. Just holding it felt like enough for now. Warmth, given without agenda. Eli remained in the armchair across the room, quiet and present, hands folded loosely in his lap. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances or polite distractions. He just stayed. And somehow that was more comforting than any words could have been. Vanessa glanced at him through the golden haze of the repaired bedside lamp. There was no judgment in his expression, no pity, only calm, steady, real. "I don't usually talk about it," she said, her voice brittle. "People assume I'm cold or private, but really, I'm just tired of explaining myself." "You don't have to," Eli said softly. She exhaled, slow, trembling. For a woman who spent her life controlling rooms, commanding meetings, and dictating multi-million-dollar deals, it was unnerving how safe she felt saying nothing here. The man in front of her wasn't impressed by her titles. He wasn't afraid of her silence either. "I don't know why I asked you to stay," she admitted. "I do," Eli replied, his voice low. "Because sometimes it's not about needing help. It's about not wanting to be alone in the dark." Vanessa's throat tightened. No one had ever understood it so simply, so quietly. She looked down at the tea in her hands. It was still warm, still real. "Have you ever been trapped?" she asked suddenly, her eyes lifting back to his. Eli didn't speak right away. "Not like you were," he answered truthfully. "But yeah, I've been trapped, in debt, in worry, in hospital rooms with my daughter hooked to machines, wondering if I could make it another month. Watching her sleep, praying her heart would hold on long enough for mine to figure things out." He paused, rubbed his thumb over his palm. "So yeah, I know what it's like when you can't see the way out." Something in Vanessa softened. Here was this man, just a mechanic, just a father, and yet he spoke like someone who had weathered every storm alone too. She reached for something she didn't think she'd ever offer again. Vulnerability. "I think I've been alone so long, I forgot how to let anyone stay," she said, eyes glistening. Eli leaned forward slightly, not to close the distance, but to meet her where she was. "You didn't ask me to fix you," he said quietly. "You just asked me to stay. That's something I know how to do." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said the words she'd never said to anyone outside of therapy, and even then not like this. "Will you?" It was barely a whisper, But Eli heard her. He didn't nod. He didn't promise forever. He just stood, slowly, crossed the room, and gently moved the armchair a few inches closer to the bed. Then he sat again, silent, steady, present. That was his answer. Vanessa's shoulders loosened. Her breathing slowed. The tension that had lived in her bones for years began to ease. She took a small sip of the tea. It was hot, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel afraid of the night, because someone saw her and stayed anyway. 3 weeks later, the waiting room at Senny Laura's Children's Hospital smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. The chairs were too small, the lights too harsh, and the silence too thick. Eli Monroe sat slumped forward, elbows on his knees, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. His daughter Emily was in surgery, and he couldn't do a thing about it. The doctors had warned him the operation would be delicate, high risk. Her heart, too small and too fragile, was finally being given the chance it deserved. But the days leading up to it had been brutal. Eli hadn't slept, barely ate. He spent hours pacing, replaying every decision he'd ever made, wondering if he had done enough, if he had waited too long. But he had also received something he couldn't explain, a phone call. An administrator from the hospital had reached out with news. The entire cost of Emily's surgery had been covered. All of it. When Eli asked who, they simply said, it was anonymously donated under the name Hope Grant. He had stared at the phone for a full minute, heart racing. Hope Grant. He knew that wasn't a real name, but he knew exactly who it was. Now, 3 hours into the surgery, he sat alone in a waiting room with nothing but fear and gratitude twisting inside him. And down the hallway, behind the one-way observation window looking into the pediatric recovery wing, Vanessa Kingsley stood completely still. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a long beige coat and sunglasses to hide her eyes, not from the world, but from herself. She had come alone. No assistance, no driver. No one knew she was there. She didn't need thanks. She wasn't looking for recognition. She just needed to see Emily's chest rise and fall with her own eyes. And when the surgeon finally came out with a tired but gentle smile, Eli crumpled into the nearest chair, shoulders shaking as tears spilled freely. She watched him rush into the recovery room and drop to his knees beside his daughter's bed. He kissed her tiny fingers and whispered, "You made it, baby. You made it." And even though Vanessa wasn't in the room, she felt those words echo inside her. That night, she had promised herself never to owe anyone again, but now giving, quietly, freely, had freed something in her too. As Eli held his daughter close, unaware of the figure watching through the glass, Vanessa rested a hand against the window. Her fingers didn't touch him, but the gesture said everything. I stayed, not in your home, but in your corner. She turned and walked away before the tears reached her collar. She didn't need him to know. She only needed Emily to live. And somehow, in giving light to a child's heart, she had rekindled something in her own. There's still darkness in me, but maybe we can light it together. The rain had returned, not in a storm, but in a soft, steady drizzle that wrapped the world in quiet. Vanessa opened the front door before Eli could even knock. She wore no heels this time, no armor. Just a cream-colored sweater and jeans, her hair down, damp at the ends. I'm not here to fix anything, Eli said gently. She smiled. Good. Nothing's broken tonight. They stepped outside together, barefoot in the grass behind her mansion. String lights flickered above them, swaying lightly between the trees. The rain clung to their skin, but neither flinched. The air was thick with memory, but also something new. I don't invite people here, Vanessa said, her voice low. Not like this. I don't usually show up unless there's a short circuit, Eli replied with a quiet grin. She laughed, genuinely this time. This, not the careful, professional laugh she gave at fundraisers. It was small and real, and it reached her eyes. They walked slowly through the garden, where roses drooped under the gentle weight of rain. They spoke about their pasts, not in heavy detail, but in glimmers. Eli told her about raising Emily alone, about nights spent holding her through fever and fear. Vanessa shared pieces of a life built from silence and walls. At one point, they stopped beneath a low tree, droplets falling like tiny stars around them. "There's still darkness in me," Vanessa whispered. "I don't know if it ever really leaves." Eli looked at her, not to fix, not to reassure, but to simply see her. "Then maybe," he said, "we light it together." She didn't cry. She didn't retreat. She reached out, and this time, when he took her hand, she didn't let go. They didn't talk about what it meant. They didn't have to, because sometimes healing doesn't begin with declarations. It begins with quiet steps, wet grass, and a hand held without expectation. And that night, under soft rain and old wounds, two people, once strangers in a blackout, began something new. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And real finally was enough. 1 year later, the garden behind the house bloomed brighter than it ever had. Clusters of soft white roses lined the walkway, and string lights stretched from tree to tree like stars caught mid-fall. The air smelled of jasmine and rain-kissed earth, and laughter carried through it like music. Vanessa sat at a weathered, upright piano placed beneath the tallest oak. Her fingers moved hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. She hadn't touched a piano in 20 years. But tonight the notes came back like memories that had never truly left. Gentle, clear, alive. Across the yard, Eli stood on a stepladder, twisting a stubborn bulb until it flickered to life. He looked over his shoulder, smiling softly at the scene behind him. Emily danced barefoot in the grass. She twirled in a soft yellow dress, her arms open wide, cheeks flushed with joy, her hair wild in the wind. A year ago, she had needed machines to help her breathe. Now she ran as if the world had never weighed her down. She spun toward the piano and called out through her laughter, "Mommy, look! I found a heart-shaped leaf!" Vanessa paused, her hands stilled on the keys. She turned, eyes wide. Emily ran to her and placed the little leaf in her lap, then threw her arms around her waist with the ease of a child who trusted completely. "I love you, Mommy Vanessa." And just like that, the last of the fear inside her cracked open. Vanessa had built empires, survived horrors, hidden behind wealth and wit for most of her life. But now, holding this tiny girl, this miracle who'd once fought for every heartbeat, she felt something unfamiliar and overwhelming rise in her chest. She cried, not from grief, not from memory, but from joy. Eli walked over quietly, kneeling beside them. He wrapped one arm around Vanessa's shoulders and the other around his daughter, anchoring them all together. They stayed like that as the piano notes faded, as the sun dipped behind the trees, as the light strung above them swayed gently with the evening breeze. They weren't perfect. They weren't planned. But they were whole, because family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who stays when the lights go out. Sometimes it's not the grand gestures that change our lives. It's the quiet ones. A mechanic who stayed, a woman who dared to trust again, and a little girl whose laughter reminded them both that healing is possible. In today's world, where so many people feel unseen, disconnected, or just plain tired, maybe this story reminds us of something deeper. That presence can be more powerful than perfection. That listening without judgment is a kind of love. And that family isn't just who we're born to, it's who shows up when we're most in the dark. Have you ever had someone sit with you in your worst moment? Or have you been that person for someone else? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What does family mean to you? Do you believe people can still find love and connection, even after decades of pain? And most importantly, would you have stayed like Eli did? Thank you so much for spending time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to Warm Soul Stories, where we share true-to-life tales that celebrate kindness, resilience, and quiet miracles. And if you know someone who might need this message, send it to them. Sometimes a story is the light someone's been waiting for. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and remember, even the smallest light can reach someone's deepest darkness.